Hi everyone, welcome to my channel if you're new here. Welcome back to my channel if you're a returning viewer subscriber. Today's video is really exciting because I'm going to be running through every single book that I've read this year, telling you my rating and also giving you a very brief little line, or maybe a couple of lines, about how much I enjoyed them, what the book's about, any sort of thing I feel like you need to know before you go into it if you want to kind of like assess the vibe. I've capped this video at the exact 6-month mark, which is a couple of days into July, and at the exact halfway point of the year I've read 33 books. 3 of those were DNFs, but I still feel like I want to mention them. And without further ado, let's just get on into the video because I feel like we're going to be here for quite a while. The first book that I read in 2024 was Legends and Lattes by Baldree, a super cute, cozy fantasy book that just brought me so much joy and happiness, and I just loved every single second of it. Definitely more of like a subjective 5-star, talking about my personal enjoyment of the book, not so much like brilliant writing or plot structure or whatever, just like a book that I genuinely had a really good time reading. I just adored it, so very highly recommend if you're interested in taking a little dive into the cozy fantasy genre and seeing if that's for you. I finished a book that I've been in the middle of for a little while, and that was Beautiful World, Where Are You by Rooney. I wanted to read all of Sally Rooney's books. I've been reading them in publication order, and this is her most recent release. I'm so excited that we have a new Sally Rooney on its way. That releases I think in September. At the time I read this I didn't know what we had on the horizon, and I felt kind of bad about the fact that I didn't have any more of her books to get through, especially as I didn't love this one. It was a very mixed kind of bag. It kind of alternated between email exchanges and then in-person meetups with friends, and it's following these 4 people who are in their 20s or early 30s or something as they kind of like come in and out of each other's lives. They're kind of linked together by 2 main characters, Alice and Eileen. The rest of it is just like, you know, messy people living their messy lives. Very well written, but just not my favourite thing in the world. I read Indigo by deveney. This is a little kind of country, small town romance book. Say that kind of tentatively because it also has quite a strong mystery plotline as well. I feel like this is a really great book for people who find straight up romance books a little bit too boring, because this one really engaged me with the mystery element. If there was no mystery element, then I feel like this would have been a really dull basic romance, but that part really kind of held my interest. Still only a 3-star overall, nothing life-changing, nothing revolutionary. I would still recommend it to people who are interested in the kind of fusion between those 2 genres. This is in a series of interconnected standalones. I don't think I'm going to continue, but having said that, I'm not ruling off ever having anything more to do with this author or this series or whatever it may be. But yeah, I would recommend this. I just don't think it was anything that's going to kind of stick with me for years to come. I read An Ember in the Ashes by Tahir. Really, really good YA fantasy, first book in a series. Just so well written and constructed. I was really impressed by the story. It wasn't my favourite thing, but I also feel like if I'd read this when I was younger, when I was like in the peak of the YA reading age, this would have been my favourite thing ever. And for a lot of people this is one of their favourite books, so I would very, very highly recommend this one. Still not sure whether I'm going to bother continuing the series, but I would highly recommend the audiobook because that's how I read the majority of this title. I did a Normal People reread. This is one of my favourite books of all time, and I actually read a different copy from the one I've got here because I was annotating it for one of my favourite people and loved the experience of annotating it, loved the experience of rereading it. Just one of the best books ever. Such a quick read but also so engaging. I care deeply for these characters and their messy story, and it's just wonderful. Definitely my favourite Sally Rooney. I read The Field Guide by diterlizzi and Holly Black. This is the first book in the Spiderwick Chronicles, a series of 5 middle grade books. They're amazing, just the most perfect fantasy world. It's got fairies and goblins and ogres and just everything ever. It's kind of like an urban fantasy. We follow this family, we follow these kids, these twin boys and their sister, as they explore the fairy realm. Holly Black writes her fae like no one else. The illustrations in this are beautiful, and I'm definitely intrigued to continue on with this series. I haven't got to any of the other books yet, but I adore the original film adaptation. I think it was 2008. One of my favourite films ever, so I was so excited to be able to kind of see what the novel was based on was like. Great time, just such a heartwarming story with a really interesting, beautifully done world. I read Mr. Wrong Number by Lynn Painter. It's my second Lynn Painter. I loved this. This kind of falls within the new adult range. The only thing I'd read from her before was Better Than the Movies, which is a YA book, so I was kind of intrigued by her adult stuff, but still like a little bit wary of it. But yeah, I loved this. This was hilarious. We follow this girl, moves in with her brother and his flatmate. Her life's just become a bit of a mess. She went through a really, really disastrous breakup, and she is also looking for another job and everything like that. But while she's navigating this change in her life, she's also in this like flirtatious text conversation with this Mr. Wrong Number, who is this anonymous person she accidentally texted. Or did he accidentally text her? I can't remember. But either way, it's just hilarious because it turns out that the person who she's texting, this is not a spoiler by the way, it's on the back of the book, is her brother's flatmate, so her flatmate. Shenanigans ensue. So well written, so engaging and hilarious, and the best time, just a really, really light, fun read. I read Submarine by Dunthorne. This is a kind of coming of age novel. Also very, very funny, very witty and clever. Written by a guy who was actually at university at the time when he wrote it. So impressive as a debut and also as a book written by someone who was very young at the time. I love this. It's so quirky and gentle-hearted. The film adaptation is really, really good as well. Definitely captures the vibe of the book. I've watched the film before and the plot is quite different, but the tone of the story is definitely there. So if you're a fan of the film, check out the book. If you love the book, check out the film. Goes both ways. I had the best time with this. I wasn't sure how to rate it. It was either like a 4, 4.5, somewhere there. I think I've put a 4 on Goodreads, but it's probably like around 4.25. I rounded off the Caravel series by reading the final book in that trilogy, which is Finale by Garber. I love this series. It's one of my favorites. It's kind of like a 5-star series, but I didn't rate any of the books in it 5 stars. This was a 4.5. It's so magical, so beautiful. Garber is so creative and awesome. I just love her so much. I really admire what she managed to think up, basically. Yeah, great characters, really interesting magical plot, and I don't know, I just adored this. So good, and such a perfect end to the series. However, we then read Powerless by Lauren Roberts, a new release fantasy book, new adult kind of fantasy book, 0 spice, which is nice, but it also was just like so bad. This is obviously personal, but I honestly found so many problems with this book. A lot to do with the writing just not being good enough. I know that lots of people love this though, so I would still recommend kind of giving it a go, but don't be afraid to DNF if you're not enjoying, because I slogged through like 500 pages of this and came out the end wishing I had never begun. Enemies to lovers, take that with a pinch of salt. Hunger Games, Red Queen-esque fantasy book. I read August Blue by Deborah Levy. I love this, following this woman. She's a professional concert pianist, but she has a little bit of a breakdown, like actually on stage when she's performing one evening, which causes her to run away to various countries in Europe to escape her present existence, and in doing so connects with her adoptive father and also examines like what went wrong in her life to bring her to this point. I love Deborah Levy's writing. I really, really enjoyed this, and I also highly recommend it. It is quite kind of like speculative and ambiguous though, so if you're not into books that don't give you like a direct answer to all of your questions, then maybe this could be one to miss. I haven't read too many classics this year, but I did get to Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. This was unfortunately a 3-star read. I didn't love it. I would highly recommend books like Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, things like that, but this one just wasn't everything for me. It was kind of sold as a gothic romance book, and we don't even get to Northanger Abbey, which is the gothic house, until we're like halfway through the book, and there's still very little focus on that. It's so much more about the relationships, which I mean, it's a Jane Austen book, so what was I expecting? But I just didn't connect with the love interest. I didn't really love the main character, and I also thought she was very mistreated by so many other characters in the book. Just not my favourite thing in the world, but still well written obviously, and funny because Jane Austen is a master of her craft. The world is going to love this. Up from the Basement with the Strokes by Raphael. Amazing. This is written by the producer of the Strokes' first 2 albums. The Strokes are one of my favourite bands in the world. Seeing the kind of behind the scenes of the creation of 2 of their masterpieces was just everything. On top of that, Raphael had a really interesting, or has had a really interesting life. He's only, you know, like in his 50s. He's definitely still going, but we see a lot of the start of his career, what came to be a very, very impressive, interesting career with lots of like ups and downs, which I also really appreciated seeing. He didn't have this kind of like downhill road to success. It was quite a hike to get where he got to. I really, really enjoyed this. Such an honest, well-written memoir, and so underrated. If you're a fan of the Strokes or just the music scene in general, this could be it for you. Like it was for me too. Read and DNF'd A Curious Beginning by Deanna Raybourn. This is a kind of like historical Regency romance mystery book. I don't know, I don't think I love Regency books that aren't actually written during the Regency time. I don't really like them, particularly written by American authors who are like tapping into like the Bridgerton-esque thing. You know, I don't know. It just didn't work for me personally, but I know for a fact this works for a lot of other people, so worth giving a go if you're into that sort of thing. If you're not, then maybe I would skip it. Maybe you could try it. I don't know. If you're at all intrigued, I would probably give it a go because it's totally fine to DNF. I finally finished Getting Lost by Annie Ernaux. This is a book I'd been in the middle of for a number of months. I had a good time with this read overall. I'd say that it is a bit of a slog because it's just diary entries. It's a book that accompanies one of my favourite books, which is Simple Passion by the same author, obviously. Simple Passion is a semi-fictionalised account of an affair that our author Annie Ernaux has with a married man, but Getting Lost is the diaries that kind of support the events of Simple Passion. This is long, and we have a lot of Annie Ernaux just complaining about her life and the fact that she can't be with this man. It's also very much just about the cold hard facts of an affair, so if you're not into that, which I know that a lot of people will not be, this might not be the read for you. I definitely begin with Simple Passion, and then if you're really, really keen on that book, then this one is kind of an interesting behind the scenes. If you don't love that, then I wouldn't bother. I've been wanting to read the Throne of Glass series for the longest time. I've read The Assassin's Blade in like 2019 or something, and then I read Throne of Glass in 2022. I don't know, I just dragged out the whole series so much, so I decided to reread Throne of Glass, the first book, so I could then continue on with books 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8. So that's what I did. I reread Throne of Glass. I originally rated this 3.5, and this time around I actually rated it 4.5, so it went up an entire star, which is pretty crazy. I love the series, it's just so good. This one, I would say, actually looking back on it, is probably a 4, but you know, I'm kind of content to stick with a 4.5 for now. Maybe I'll reread it again and we can properly assess how I feel about it like way later down the line. But yeah, for now this was just a really good solid start to the series. I love the characters, I love the kind of setup we get, and the really good writing. I particularly enjoyed this book because I'd read it on the back of Powerless, having disliked that one so much, and then reading a book that was so much better than it but was like similar themes and storyline and things like that. This just really worked for me and I thoroughly enjoyed my time reading it. I read Book Lovers by Emily Henry. It's my 3rd Emily Henry book. I'm reading her books in publication order. I don't know where I stand with this really. I thought it was fine. It was good, but I just didn't connect with anything. I didn't love the storyline, I didn't love the characters. I don't know, I just wasn't invested. I think that's the main thing. But I can't argue that this was a good book, but that's kind of as far as I will go. I read and then DNF'd Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. This is a pandemic novel, not a book set in 2020's pandemic, but a book written way before that, almost eerily predicting the 2020 pandemic. The events that goes down in this are so similar to COVID, and that's the reason why I ended up DNFing it, was that it just was a little bit too close to that. I didn't know this going into it, but I am surprisingly less comfortable discussing that than I thought I might have been, and it just made me anxious. I think I was already anxious at the time, and then this just on top of that was just too much, so I DNF'd this. I'm not sure whether this is a soft DNF, whether it's one that I'll get to in the future, but for now, I just decided to put it down. I read Crown of Midnight by Sarah J Maas, the 2nd book in the Throne of Glass series. I adored this, a really, really solid 4.5. Definitely preferred it over Throne of Glass, but the plot is just so different in this one. You definitely fall in love with the characters. It's a lot to do with the relationships between them, and we also start to open up the plot and the magic system and things like that. It was just such a joy to read. Highly recommend the series. I read Heartless by, I was gonna say Marissa Meyer. This is not that book. This is Heartless by Elsie Silver, the 2nd book in the Chestnut Spring series, which is a series of interconnected standalone books set on a ranch. These are cowboy romances. They're just such fun, good vibes. It's well written for what it is. What it is not anything complex. This is just like basic, fun, good times, but nothing difficult to understand. Not great literature, but just like fits so perfectly within the genre. I definitely think there's a place for books like this, and I feel like Elsie Silver's writing is just perfect for what she's trying to achieve. This is a single dad nanny romance book. We follow this girl called Willa as she's kind of hired by this guy called Cade to look after his 5-year-old son. The kid was written really well and the romance was really cute, but I didn't love some of the spice scenes in this. Still really enjoyed. Also, the first book in that series, Powerless, is one of my favourite romance books ever. I read Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren. I really didn't like this book. I had so many issues with it. I didn't think it was brilliantly written, and on top of that, the ending was just so not my kind of thing. I felt so like personally offended by this book. I don't know, it just really rubbed me the wrong way. It's a childhood friends to lovers, and we have a then and now timeline. In the then timeline, these 2 kids are like falling in love over the course of many, many years, and then something goes wrong in the past, which we discover at the end of the book, which means that in the present timeline, when they bump into each other years and years on, they're having to kind of rebuild something which was completely broken down in the past. The thing that happened in the past was so out of line, so out of order. I don't know, even like the apology or lack of apology that existed in the future over what had happened. I don't know, it was just unbelievable to me. Really disappointing because I had such high hopes for this book. This is a lot of people's favourite book of all time, and I just didn't see it at all. I read Belladonna by Adeline Grace. This is another kind of YA fantasy book, but it also is slightly Regency. Very strong gothic vibes. They loved it for that. Overall, this was just like a bit of a, not boring, but like, I don't know, just a middle of the road book. It is actually kind of interesting. It's very unique, but there's some weird aspects to it in the plot and the kind of almost like the magic system. But yeah, it's a lot to do with kind of like ghosts, and it's set in this big house. I follow this girl who can actually communicate with death. And it's crazy, unique, and I guess a little bit fun. I read Acts of Desperation by Megan Nolan. This is a literary fiction book following this girl who is really, really struggling. She's dealing with some sort of undiagnosed mental health issue. She's in a really, really toxic relationship with this man who doesn't care about her at all, but simultaneously is very possessive and in control of her life. How she kind of like governs herself. Difficult read, as you can imagine, but also so well done. Such a great book, especially as I believe it's a debut. I read a 5-star book, Serpent on the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. This was incredible. This is a fantasy book. It's in a world that has humans and vampires, and we're following a human who is actually adopted by the vampire king. She enters this competition called the Kajari, where she competes with all of these vampires in order to win a wish from the goddess. Her wish is to become a vampire so that she can live without fear, because obviously vampires prey on humans. It was just so well written, such an interesting world, so creative, world building, the magic system, everything like that was really, really great. I was so invested. I was in tears by the end of this book. Crazy plot twist. If you're really interested in a book that has you kind of guessing all over the place, but also then had these reveals that then turn out to not be true, and then I don't know, just it was insane. An engaging book, and I just love every single moment of it. Like I said, one of my favourite books of the year for sure. That's the first book in a duology, and I've yet to read the second book. That first one was just mind-blowing, so good. I read Done and Dusted by Lila Sage. This is another book series that's set on a ranch, another cowboy romance series. Follow this guy called Luke Brooks and this girl Clementine. Luke is her brother's best friend, and they had a lot to do with each other when they were younger, and then they run into each other years later, where Clementine comes back home after being away because she went off to do barrel racing and then had this big injury. Luke kind of teaches her how to get on a horse again. It's a really fun story. I really like the vibes, but I just wasn't obsessed. Definitely prefer the kind of Chestnut Springs series over this one, but I'm still intrigued to read book 2 and 3 once I can get my hands on them. I read another Deborah Levy book. This is The Cost of Living. This is the second book in a trilogy. It's the Living Autobiography trilogy, so it's a series of non-fiction books all about Deborah Levy's writing life. It's kind of like memoirs. So the first book was very focused on her writing life, and the second book was more focused on her womanhood and fight she had between wanting to be a good mother to her children, especially after her divorce and being a single mother, wanting to keep her career going, and this need to write. And I just loved the discussions that were had in this. I just thought it was a really, really good book, and like I said, I love Levy's writing, so this was no exception. I read Raybourn Beyond Journey's End. This is a little manga, first book in a series. It's set in this medieval world. I'd say I really loved the world, but I didn't love... Oh my gosh. My mum was just downstairs absolutely blasting the Alexa, so hopefully I haven't got copyrighted / you could actually hear me with that last book. But yeah, this is a manga, first manga, so I didn't really know what to expect, but I really enjoyed that. The problem was with this is that I just didn't love it, basically. I didn't connect with it. It wasn't the book for me, but I loved the world and the art style and things like that. It was just the rest of it that I wasn't obsessed with. I'm glad that I kind of got to my first manga. It's definitely a new thing, and I'm excited to explore the style of book further. I read Crown of Coral and Pearl by Mara Rutherford, another YA fantasy book. It's the first book in a duology. I thought it was a really creative world. It follows this girl who grows up in a village that's built on stilts because they live in the water, and she spends her life swimming in the sea gathering pearls. But the big thing in this book is that she's married off to the prince, and the prince lives in a kingdom that's far away from where she lives, and she's never allowed to go back to where she grew up, and she has no idea what the prince's kingdom is like. It's a very kind of like dark, mysterious world, very, very unique, and I think that's where the strength of this series is. I like the characters, I like the plot, but just, I don't know, there was nothing that I personally really connected with. I was impressed by the story and the world building, but not by the parts of the book that kind of raised the rating for me. It doesn't make no sense at all. Basically watch my June wrap up if you want to hear more about this, because I'm struggling right now. I think it's because we've just talked through like 30 books and we're getting towards the end. I read Near to the Wild Heart by Clarissa Spector. This is a, what do you call this? Oh my gosh. Like a magical realism that's written in this kind of stream of consciousness style. The bottom line is that I just didn't connect with this book. I really, really tried to, but I didn't understand like 97% of what was going on. There was the odd line that I really loved, but for the most part, this just didn't work for me personally. Clarissa Spector, for some people, is everything and more. If there's a possibility that you could be into a book that's a little bit less clear and more about like how you feel, tapping into something that's not very explicit, does that make sense? Maybe that could be your kind of thing, because like I said, it works really, really well for some people and really, really not well for others. I read Air of Fire by Sarah J Maas, third book in the Throne of Glass series. My favourite so far, almost 6 stars. So much character development in this book, so much opening up the world, an exploration of the magic system, the plot that we're really going to be facing across this series. Loved this. It was just everything I could ever want, and I just had such a good, happy feeling while I read this book. I felt so content in it and so comfortable reading these words and exploring this world further and these characters. This was just everything, and I don't know, I adore it. Check out this series. This is your third reminder this video to read Throne of Glass if you haven't already. I read and DNF'd Calypso by Dave Sedaris. This is a non-fiction memoir written by a man who is, you know, he's a very good writer. Oh my gosh, he's a very good writer. Very humorous, but just didn't connect with this. I found some things like a little bit, I don't know, I just didn't love this basically. Not for me. Some people are huge Sedaris fans, so if you like a memoir that is told in a very interesting way, then I'd recommend this. I read Despair by Banman Nabokov. I read this for a video in which I read Alex Turner's favourite book. This is his favourite book. quite clearly. I love Nabokov. I think he's incredible, and I think this book was no different. Definitely an underrated one of his, but if you are interested at all, then definitely recommend this. He's just the greatest linguist. The story is really, really interesting as well, following this man who's convinced he's just met his doppelganger, and he does everything he can to intertwine their lives, but he's also just like slipping off the rails a little bit as he does so, and the book just spirals out of control towards the end of it. And then the final book that I read in June, marking the midway point of the year, was Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. Love Stephanie Garber, like I've already established with the Caraval trilogy, with Finale. Yeah, the first book in a new series. We're following this girl called Evangeline as she makes this deal with the Prince of Hearts. Crazy plot, it just goes all over the place, but the writing is great. The world is so magical and beautiful and fairy tale-esque. This series will be a lot of fun. I haven't read books 2 and 3 yet, obviously, but from what I've kind of sensed with this one, I feel like we're going to be having a good time. So there you have it. I'm exhausted. 33 books that I read in June. In June? What the heck? No. In the first 6 months of 2024. I'm having such a good reading year. I've had so many 5 stars. I usually have like 2 or 3 a year. I got some stats here that I thought we could run through quickly. 33 books, DNF 3 of them. I own 24 of the 33 that I've read, although several of these are on my getting rid of Depop eBay list. 6 of them, so I'm keeping 18 of the 33 that I've read. But there are some books that I've read via ebook that I still want to buy. But yeah, I feel like those are good numbers, and I'm really happy with what I've got to. I'm pleased with the amount I've got to. There's definitely books that were on my 2024 TBR that I still need to get to in the latter half of the year, but I don't know, overall I'm like pleased with how things have gone in the first half of the year. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up to let me know you did. Subscribe if you'd like to stick around and see more videos from me, see what the latter half of the year looks like. I'll do another one of these videos at the end of December when the year's wrapped up. And without further ado, I'm going to leave you in peace because it's been a long video and I've been here talking for too long. Bye bye.